That was beautiful. What a beautiful way to set up for our last 30 minutes together today. I, I barely have words in my mouth, you guys. I'm so moved. Thank you. I want to welcome two special people to the stage with me for our last 30 minutes together. Today we have Marc Freedman and Helen Abel joining us. And Jessica, you can bring them to the stage with me. Marc Freedman is the president, CEO, and founder of Encore.org. He's one of the nation's leading experts on the longevity revolution. He's a member of the Wall Street Journal's experts panel. He's a frequent commentator in the media and the author of 5 books. And his newest book is How to Live Forever, The Enduring Power of Connecting the Generations. This was featured in the New York Times and named by the Wall Street Journal as one of the year's best books on aging. I personally highly recommend it. It's full of great stories that illuminate the ideas. And in this book, Marc, he issues a deeply personal call, to find fulfillment and happiness in our longer lives, the longevity we're experiencing, by connecting with the next generation and forging a legacy of love that lives beyond us. And today, Marc's going to be interviewed by Helen Abel. Helen's one of my treasured creative aging colleagues. She's a licensed clinical social worker by training, and many years ago co-founded a collective to create change in the mental health field. She continues to facilitate change through group and individual coaching, where she uses creativity and play to encourage people like me to uncover paths towards greater belonging and community. She's a life performance coach at Life Performance Coaching Center in San Francisco. Helen, thank you for joining us. I welcome and turn it over to you.
Hi, so I'm very happy to be here. And I will be interviewing Marc. Hi, Marc.
Hi, Helen. Thank you so much for doing this. And thank you, Katie, for that lovely introduction.
Yeah. So, Marc, our first question is, how did you get into this life work of creating Encore.org and, seeing that the lack of intergenerational spaces and age segregation, specifically around those issues, what made you decide to do this and to start this organization also?
Well, first I thought I'd start with an apology. Just as I was coming on, the sun seems to have shifted behind me, so I got a little bit of a luminescent presence here. But I immediately thought of 2 reasons in response to your question. One's the professional and the other's the personal one. Maybe I'll just start and say professionally, I thought I was going to focus my entire working life on trying to help young people growing up in low-income environments get a better shot at the world, and became convinced early on that one of the most effective and powerful things that we could do is help young people have more opportunities to connect with caring adults. Yuri Bronfenbrenner, who started the Head Start program and was one of the great child development scholars of the last century, at the end of his career was asked what he had learned from writing dozens of books and hundreds of articles. He said, what every child needs is at least one adult who's irrationally crazy about them. And I was involved in the study of the Big Brother, Big Sister program, the first study that had been done in almost a century. And it showed tremendous benefits for young people, 46% difference in kids using drugs, a 50% difference in school truancy. But that program and a lot of other mentoring programs for kids trying to create these relationships were struggling to find the human beings to do the things that only people can do. And mostly they were focusing on adults in the middle generation who barely had enough time to spend with their own kids, much less someone else's kid. And so it seemed like they were missing the great demographic opportunity of our time, which is the vast and growing older population. And so that really got me thinking about how we could forge a win-win of really staggering proportions if we could connect older and younger people in ways that provided a sense of belonging and purpose and connection for older people, and the same for young people. the other reason, I won't say the real reason, because there's probably two real reasons, is that I benefited repeatedly in my own life from connections with older people who took me under wing. When I showed up at college in 1976, I was utterly ill prepared for the rigors of higher education. And I think I managed to set during my first 2 years of school, some kind of record for the most incomplete courses. And at the college I went to get an incomplete course, you had to ask the professor, you had to fill out a form, but you had to see also a wizened 70-year-old dean named Gilmore Stott. And I had to see him so many times. He became my own mentor because I had so many struggles getting work done. And he, very much with the theme of the day, he created for me a sense of belonging. He didn't tell me what to do. He didn't tutor me academically. He just made me feel like I was welcome. And that made all the difference for me. So for me, it's been a convergence of personal and professional experiences that have made me so dedicated to this issue.
It's great. I know one of the things you told us is that you're interested also in popular culture and feeling that popular culture now is becoming in some ways more intergenerational and trying to create a sense of belonging. So I wondered if you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I've been watching a lot of TV like most people over the last couple of years for lack of being able to do other things. And maybe it's just because I'm obsessed with this issue of intergenerational connection, but it seems to me that film, television, music are telling us really important things about the choices in front of us. And I'll just say, some of the things that they're showing us are really uncomfortable. There's a great scene in the Kaminsky Method, the Netflix series with Michael Douglas and Alan Arkin, where Michael Douglas's character, who's an acting teacher, is really down in the dumps. He's got prostate cancer. He's just been diagnosed. He's in financial straits. And he decides to take a walk in the park to try to clear his head. And he's talking to his daughter while on his phone while he's walking through the park. And he hears in the distance the sound of children playing, and he navigates his way to this playground. And he sits down and is watching these young children on monkey bars. And, his spirit starts brightening. And then in the background, in kind of fuzzy tones, you see a couple of mothers talking anxiously to each other. Then they're joined by a police officer and a second police officer, and he's talking to his daughter, and he says, "They've called the cops." The idea that an older person is interested in children has become almost a suspect practice. And so the question of how did we make something so natural, this grandparent-like bond, seem abnormal? And then at the same time, there's been show after show that's shown us the opposite. One of my favorites is Hacks, this past season, which has won all the awards for best comedy series and best comedy actress for Jean Smart, who's 70. And it's the story of an aging Las Vegas comedian who's about to be booted from her Saturday night slot, and a young 27-year-old comedy writer who's been canceled in Hollywood, and how they're forced to come together to save each other's careers, and in the process to forge a powerful bond across generations. The New York Times described it as a love story disguised as a hate story. And I think that in many ways that characterizes our whole societal moment, where we've got, for the first time ever, so many older and younger people. Last year we had, for the first time ever, we had more people over 60 than under 18, but we'll soon have 5 population groups of roughly the same size as we become a much more multi-generational society. And I think there's a big question for us as individuals and as a nation, how we navigate this new demographic reality.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I also know that you've written several books, and I wondered if you could talk about, how your writing has been, and also the value of storytelling and writing, in terms of creating intergenerational spaces.
Yeah, I think we need a new story as a society that's going to guide us through not only the aging of America, but this more multi-generational world. And so that's why I'm so happy about your question about popular culture. In the books that I've written, I've tried to both tell my own story and also the stories of people that I've met along the way. And I guess I wasn't planning to talk about this, but I'll tell you. I mean, maybe the real reason I've been doing this work is an experience that I had over 30 years ago, where I was looking around the country for places where older people were connecting with children and forging powerful bonds, and I ended up at a foster grandparent program in Portland, Maine, at Maine Medical Center, which is the biggest hospital in the state and has the biggest pediatric ward. And I met two older women, Aggie Bennett and Louise Casey, who were then in their 60s. Aggie was the tall one. She was 4'11". Louise was 4'10". Louise had worked in a sawmill. Aggie had been a waitress. And they both retired and didn't like it. They joined the foster grandparent program, which promptly sent them to the pediatrics ward at Maine Medical Center. And what they discovered when they were there is there were so many children who were really isolated, who didn't have that sense of belonging that we've been talking about today. And in many cases, those kids facing the most difficult circumstances. So imagine, you're 8 years old, you're from 4 or 5 hours away, you're in the hospital dealing with cancer or heart condition or some other tremendously difficult situation. Maybe you're even in pain. And after about a week, your parents have to leave because they've got other children to take care of. They have jobs that they can't afford to lose. They're hours away. And that's where Aggie and Louise came in, and they became essentially grandparents to the children. And I asked them at one point, this is supposed to be your golden years. How is it that you're dealing with these kinds of trying emotional circumstances? And Aggie told me, she said, it's not a job, it's a joy. And William Blake, the poet, wrote, I was so moved by what O'Shea was saying. He said, joy and woe are woven fine. And that was the case on the pediatric ward. And it really taught me, Marge Piercy, another poet, has a line, the pitcher cries for water to carry and a person for work that is real. And that's what Aggie and Louise had discovered there. And it's really striking how, as a society, we let the talent and the assets of so many older people go to waste when there's such urgent need all around us. And so I always think back to that experience in Portland, Maine, all those many years ago, and it animates my work to this day.
Yeah, I really, appreciate that, giving meaning to people in their second half of life and giving meaning to the younger people, doing that synergy. You talk in your book about various influential elders that impacted you in your life, and now you're becoming an influential elder. Can you say more about that, what that's like?
Yeah, I feel like I've spent most of my life soaking up the wisdom of influential elders and benefited from it. And in the process, I became 63 years old, soon to be 64. And I started asking the question of what could I have learned along the way that will help me do some of the same things. And so I've been trying to do that. Probably, other than Gil Stott, who I mentioned earlier, the great mentor in my life was a man by the name of John Gardner, who had been Lyndon Johnson's Secretary of Health, Education, and Welfare. Probably a lot of people don't remember John. He died a couple decades ago, but he was the person who implemented Medicare in 1965 and had an extraordinary impact on the life of Americans of all ages. In fact, he was on the cover of Time magazine, and they described him as the father of invention because he was behind so many important social innovations that helped give people a sense of belonging and care. And one of the lessons he taught me, he said it took him a long time to discover this himself, but that it was much more important to be interested than to be interesting. And he had taught himself to be a listener. And I think that's so important. I think it's the first step towards forging powerful relationships with people of any age.
Yeah. Katie, do we have other questions from the audience or?
Yeah, I think some are coming in. Thank you both so much. Marc, I wanted to recall, there were so many standout pieces of your book that I captured for later discussion. And one of them was this quote: "There is significant evidence from evolutionary anthropology and developmental psychology that the old and young are built for each other. It's a fit that goes back to the beginning of human history." I love that concept. Can you say more about that?
Yes, I mean, I think to go back to that scene from the Kaminsky method, you can almost think these days that older and younger people have nothing in common, but nothing could be further from the truth. When I was talking about the needs of young people for connection and belonging and relationship, and that Yuri Bronfenbrenner quote about needing at least one adult who's irrationally crazy about them. Well, I think one of the things that I discovered over the years is that we as older people need to be irrationally crazy about the younger generation. That's just as strong an impulse. And in fact, Laura Carstensen at Stanford has shown that as we grow older and there's less time ahead than behind, and that it naturally pushes people to think about connection and relationship. And you think about it, it's sort of obvious. If somebody tells you you've got 3 months to live, you don't say this would be a great time to take up the oboe or learn Mandarin. You focus on the people that your loved ones. And so naturally, as we get older, we're more inclined towards connection. And it turns out happily that the skills that are so important for forging these bonds, empathy, emotional regulation, blossom as we get older. So as we get more inclined towards relationship and connection and belonging, we get better at it. And it also turns out that there's a direction to all that connection, that the Harvard study of adult development, the gold standard of research on happiness throughout adulthood and particularly in later life, has found that older people who mentor, connect, support younger people are 3 times as likely to be happy as those who fail to do so. And so, there's a best-selling book called 10% Happier. This is 300% happier. So there's a reason to do that. So and as you pointed out, this is not something that's new. George Valent, who led that study, says biology flows downhill, that as we get older, this is a natural thing. And it goes back to the beginning of human history. Anthropologists, as you were mentioning, now think that it's the role of grandparents, grandmothers in particular, that made us human in the first place. By taking care of babies, and in the early days of human history, grandmothers enabled both parents to go out and hunt and gather, which is what allowed human babies to be helpless for a much longer period of time than other species and grow these large brains that make us human. So in a way, it was the role of grandmothers. I'd like us to adapt the grandmother hypothesis to the modern family world and create those kinds of connections, not just within families, but in communities, across families, in ways that create a new sense of family.
Yes, yes, yes. I love that concept. And it's also, Helen, I'm curious what you think about this too. It's challenging me a little bit because I've worked in my career with older adults for many years, and there is a refrain of don't see me as wise, and I don't have to hand down my guidance, right? Because there's a stereotype there too. And so I'm curious, so I'm leaning into this idea of this being a part of our purpose as humans. And Helen, any thoughts around that for you? That impulse of that stereotype around being the wise elder kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think I am conflicted around that. Certainly I have something to offer, and I don't like kind of being put up on a pedestal as a wise person. On the other, I think, one of the things that I've learned that maybe has made me wiser is that in terms of belonging, you have to keep creating it. So I was thinking about what you were saying, Mark, that you, it takes practice. So, and especially as you get older, sometimes since you're put in a particular stereotype, you have to work on that even more. And that can be community building, reaching out more, contacting friends, joining organizations, creating groups, whatever that's like. So,
Yes, yeah, I'm so glad you both raised this point, because I think you're absolutely right. We can romanticize this idea of the wise elder, but it's so much a two-way process, and it's about learning and growing throughout the life course. And I have a friend named Chip Conley who started the Modern Elder Academy in Baja. He is somebody who went and became the head of strategy at Airbnb when he was in his late 50s. And he described his role there. He was the oldest person by far, and the founders of the company, who he was supposed to be mentoring, were in their 20s. But he described himself as a mentern. It's a part mentor, part intern, part wizened sage, part beginner mind. And I think, in some ways we need the wisdom of the young and the curiosity of the old. But maybe we need the wisdom and curiosity of the young and the wisdom and curiosity of the old. But there is something very powerful about this mutual connection with younger generations. I feel it myself. I'm 64 years old. I'm not going to live forever. The idea that we're contributing to important things that will live beyond us, I think, is incredibly important. Eric Erickson, who talked about generativity, said that the hallmark of human development in later life could be encapsulated in the phrase, "I am what survives of me." And I've taken great comfort in that, and it's an exciting prospect.
Yeah, it really is. I feel that excitement myself. So there are a couple of questions coming in from the audience that I think tie well together, which is really about the practical nature of what you're sharing. So, what advice would you have for others to make intergenerational connections? How do you suggest younger and elder folks get together in an ordinary way or on a friendship basis?
Yeah, well, I think we have to just start and accept certain realities. Through most of human history, there were these deep kind of connections across generations. And I don't want to romanticize, the past, but America started the 20th century as one of the most age-integrated societies in the world. In 19th century America, people didn't even have a sense of what their age was. Knowing somebody's age would almost be like knowing their blood type today. Nobody would ever think to ask it. And, we were an agrarian society. Older and younger people worked side by side. Multi-generational households were the norm. We ended the 20th century in a state of age apartheid. Older and younger people separated in every central institution of society. And in many, it wasn't a nefarious plot, but even things like Social Security, which I consider the great triumph of social policy in the last century, it did have an intended goal of getting older people out of the workplace at a time when 20% of young people were unemployed. Schools, high schools, universal schooling, an incredibly important step forward, but it separated young people into a set of institutions. And the cumulative effect of this is that the generational twains have stopped meeting. And we were extraordinarily creative. We invented retirement communities, senior centers, nursing homes, all to serve a purpose. But in the end, they had a downside as well, which is that we've lost the sense of the wholeness of life. How do you know how to become a mentern or a modern elder when you have very little contact with people who are older than you? How do we survive as a much more multi-generational society when the generations are cut off in so many ways. And so we're going to need to be as creative in bringing people together across age as we've been in splitting them apart. And the good news is that there is a lot of energy going into that prospect now, by older people, by younger people. And I'm extraordinarily heartened all over the world by efforts that are being made to reweave the age fabric of life. Simple things like co-locating senior centers and preschools. I went to a CCRC in Maine, actually near where I first met Aggie and Louise all those years ago, called Gorham House, which has a preschool built right into the front part of the building. When you enter Gorham House, you go right by the preschool. The most coveted apartments at Gorham House are the ones that overlook the playground. I think of Michael Douglas and the Kaminsky method. The older residents at Gorham House have a chance to be surrogate grandparents for the kids. In Singapore, there's a $3 billion investment going on to create what they're describing as a compound for all ages, built around intergenerational harmony. Every new housing project built in Singapore is built around the idea of bringing 3 generations together. Every new preschool is built next to a senior center. There's a 100,000 person volunteer corps of older adults working with kids. I think there's so much that we can do that will produce the sense of belonging across the generations. And I think that the time to do it is ripe, because this demographic shift to a multi-generational society is already washing over us.
Yeah, hear, hear. Helen, is there anything you'd add to that question about finding intergenerational relationships in life? And I can give you, Jill threw out, especially for people living with dementia, you might have some expertise there.
Yeah, sure. I've been running groups, people with dementia, people who are growing older, people's care partners, kind of putting them all together for people to have an opportunity in a group to create an environment where they can express their emotions around growing older, around having dementia, around caring for somebody. So I think that's just kind of one example of, we call them creating new performances of growing older, because we can all create new ways of being in our world through performing and creating new emotions. So yeah, and I think there's just the need for all of that in so many different, environments. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think your work and Marc's work during this time where we're having to be virtual actually is creating more avenues for me to experience, relationships
Right.
with older adult that maybe I wouldn't have just literally in the coffee shop or down the street, right? It might be harder, but this intentionality that we have in virtual programming actually is, I think, leaping us forward in this way. And I thank you both for doing that work. And thank you for joining us today. I sure appreciate your time and energy. You two have been wonderful.